Are you feeling frustrated that your OET letters always seem to get the same low score? If you're looking for ways to improve your OET letter writing, you've come to the right place. In this video, I will share 7 practical tips that you can implement right now to improve your OET letter and get the high score that you need. If you follow the steps in this video, you'll have a much better chance of meeting the required standards for your OET letter. Make sure you stick around to the end to hear the most important way to improve your letters fast. Let's get started with tip number 1, which is to understand the task. The very first thing you should do when you get your case notes is to read the task and ask yourself, who am I writing to and what is my reason for writing? Once you have this information, you can start going through the case notes and thinking about the information that you need to include. Remember, no 2 OET letters will be the same, so it's absolutely essential that you have a really good understanding of who your reader is, what the situation is with the patient, and what type of information they'll need to know to continue treating them. Remember, you don't need to include every detail from the case notes in your letter. The most important thing is to understand your purpose, your reason for writing, and using this information to decide which information is most relevant. Tip number 2 is to use a clear, logical structure. Remember that one of the assessment criteria for OET writing is organization and layout. This is assessing your ability to put the information in a logical order that makes it clear for the reader. Again, no 2 OET letters will be the same. This means you cannot use a template. You cannot always use the same order of information for every letter. In some cases, it might make sense to start with the medical history. In other cases, it will be better to start with the presenting problem. It's up to you as the medical professional to decide on the most logical way to organize your information and then make sure that you put it into clear, logical paragraphs so that the reader can very easily follow your ideas and understand what they need to do. When thinking about structure, you also need to consider appropriate letter format. That means starting with the name and address of your reader, putting the date, an appropriate dear line with their name or profession, and then remembering to include a re line with the name of the patient and their date of birth. Finally, remember to end your letter with an appropriately polite and professional closing statement and a nice polite sign-off. Tip number 3 is to stay focused on the task. One of the biggest mistakes that OET candidates make is that they try to include too much information in their letter. Remember, if you include too much unnecessary detail, this will really affect your overall score. The examiner is looking for you to include the most important information and only communicate what is necessary. Therefore, if you remember tip number 1 to understand the task, this is super important. If you understand the task and you know who you're writing to, it will help you to stay on track. Tip number 4 is to use polite and formal language. Remember, you are most likely writing to another healthcare professional. This means that you should not be using idiomatic language or slang. You should avoid contractions or language that would be considered informal. Make sure you're using structures like the passive voice. Use polite modal verbs when making your requests, and avoid language like I think, as this is not appropriate in your OET letter. You should also always close your letter with a nice, polite sign-off. For example, if you need any more information, please do not hesitate to contact me. It's very important that you end your letter this way, as it shows the examiner that you know how to appropriately sign off your letter. Tip number 5 is to be clear and concise. You should avoid using long, wordy sentences in your letter that might just confuse your reader. Keep it simple and keep it factual. Only report the information that's relevant to the case, and don't try to use long, complicated sentences. Of course, it is a good idea to vary your sentence length. Try to use a variety of simple, compound, and complex sentences. However, the key with this letter is that the information is communicated in a very clear manner. For example, instead of saying, due to the patient's condition, it is very important that they follow a strict diet plan, you can simplify this by saying, the patient must follow a strict diet plan. Can you see the difference? In the first one, we used more words than we needed to. In the second one, we got the same idea communicated, but much more directly and in a way that's much easier for the reader to understand. Remember that in healthcare settings, time is often short, so conciseness is really valued. The ability to communicate your ideas in a clear and concise way is a type of skill that you're really going to need when you're working in the healthcare setting. So this is something that the examiners will be looking for. Tip number 6 is to pay attention to grammar. Using accurate grammar is also going to help you to communicate your ideas in a clear way. For example, if you are describing finished actions in the past, you're going to use the past simple tense. If you're describing an action that is ongoing, you're going to use the present continuous. For factual information such as medical and social history, you're likely to be using either the present simple or the present perfect. For example, the patient has had hypertension since 2015. The patient has a BMI of 20. Being able to use the correct tenses is very important, and it is something the examiner will be looking for. So if you're not feeling very confident with the different tenses, I recommend that you spend some time reviewing them and going over them with your teacher, who can really help you to identify which tense to use at which time. Now that leads me on to tip number 7, which is probably the most important one of all, and that is to practice your OET letter writing under the guidance and support of an expert teacher. The only way to really improve your writing is to understand exactly where you're going wrong and what you need to do to improve. By working with a teacher, you'll have the opportunity for someone with lots of OET experience and expertise to look at your letter and tell you what you're doing well and the areas that you need to improve in. For example, your letters might be very well organized and perhaps you're scoring well in organization and layout, but you're having trouble with conciseness and clarity because you're including too much information. If you work with an expert teacher, they can point this out to you and work closely with you to make sure you don't keep making the same mistakes. So if you are preparing for the OET exam and you do not currently have the help from an expert teacher, then I highly recommend that you get that help today. Remember, it's going to make a huge difference not only to your performance, but also to your motivation and confidence. Something that a lot of our students at Swoosh English struggle with in OET writing is using the correct grammar. If this is something that you want a little bit more help and support with, then I highly recommend that you check out this video next.